costume stitched with whispers, haunted by death. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I'm your host, Harrington. Comment your city. I love reading them. Wolfe's eerie investigation begins now. If you ever want to insult the brownstone, come at it with velvet. Velvet sheds. Velvet pretends it's important because it drank with kings. Velvet clings to your lapels like a desperate chorus girl and makes Fritz alternately sympathetic and murderous. So when the doorbell went off at 10 minutes to 11 and the man on the stoop was hugging a black velvet garment bag like it might jump and bite him, I knew we were in for a day. He was 28 if he wasn't 30, with the healthy pallor of a professional backstage operator, meaning he could carry 50 pounds of rhinestones up 2 flights without breathing hard, but the thought of sunlight made him flinch. He had a blonde cowlick that knew its rights and a tie that didn't. The garment bag had a glossy sticker reading Halcyon Theatricals, Property Deepit, and someone's idea of a devil drawn in Sharpie on the corner. Mr. Goodwin? He did a dry mouth swipe with his tongue. I phoned, 10:15. You said if I brought it, you'd, show it to Mr. Wolfe. I said I'd show it the hall carpet and see if it agreed to behave. I opened the door wider and angled myself between him and our furniture. You're Caro? Dane Caro. He took 2 steps like a man crossing a thin bridge. Property master at the Halcyon. The Halcyon Theatre. We just opened a revival. The Belasco Mask. He inspected my face for any glint of cultural literacy. It's like a mystery with waltzes. Don't sell me culture before 11. I took the bag from him. It was heavier than it had a right to be. Wait here. He nodded, grateful to have his hands free of the velvet albatross, and I took it past the coat tree with the respect owed to an object that had already decided to be a problem. If you're wondering why I would introduce a potentially moth-laden textile into Nero Wolfe's domicile during the sacred orchid hours, you misunderstand both my sense of self-preservation and my sense of theatre. Wolfe is not a man you squint at while you break routines. You either do it on purpose, or you don't do it at all. At 3 minutes to 11, the elevator grill rumbled and our household deity descended. Large, composed, in his brown suit that would have looked like surrender on another man, but, on him, looked like policy. He sniffed the air without sniffing, the way a diplomat recognizes the national anthem by the way everyone else stands. What, he said, not a question, is that? Velvet with an attitude, I said, with a man attached. Dane Caro, Halcyon Theatre. He brought a prop he thinks is haunted, or stolen, or both. I'm just guessing. His eyes say he hasn't slept since last Tuesday. Wolfe eyed the garment bag, which lay like a deceased seal across the red leather of the office settee. If you want to rile him, put anything on that settee besides one of his suits or a client's posterior. I had done it because I felt like demonstrating that I, too, could live dangerously. Remove it to the table, he said tersely, and made his way toward his chair. Chairs have relationships with people. That one is married. I moved the thing to the round table. Wolfe lowered himself and pressed the button. Beer came. Fritz came with it, looked at the garment bag, looked at Wolfe, and then at me. I will not have moths, he said, as one might say. I will not have Russians. Fear not, Fritz, I said. If any moths escape, we charge them union dues. Bah, said Wolfe, which in Fritz's direction was practically a sonnet. He took a glass. Bring the man, Wolfe told me. If he is to talk, let him do it where I can hear him, and if he is to lie, let him do it where I can see him. Dane Caro came into the office like he was walking into the principal's recollection of him. He took the red leather chair opposite Wolfe's desk and hovered on its front 3 inches. That chair can handle anyone from a steel executive to a disgruntled widow without complaint, but it didn't like Caro. He was too ready to jump. Mr. Wolfe, he said, breath quick, I know your rules. I'm sorry to bother you in the morning. You are not sorry, Wolfe said. glancing briefly at the garment bag. Or you would not have done it. State your difficulty. Caro's hands fluttered at the zipper and thought better of it. He looked at me. Can I? Don't, I said. If that thing has glitter, and you let it loose, I will sentence you to sweep our rugs with your eyelashes. He swallowed and sat on his own fingers. I handle props. The Halcyon's revival is old-fashioned. A lot of handwork, rented pieces from closed houses, some originals. The centerpiece is a costume from the first production, 1911. A cloak, black velvet, satin-lined, with an embroidered collar in crimson and gold. Legend says it's bad luck. 2 actors got sick when they wore it. One collapsed. A lighting rig fell the week the cloak was on stage. Last night after the show, I locked it in the prop cage. This morning, I unlocked the cage and it was on the other side of the room, on a chair. He inhaled and let the words spill. Nobody else had a key. There's no sign of forced entry. The cloak was folded different, like someone who knew how to handle it, not like the kids. And there was a note. Under it. For me. He reached inside his jacket and produced an envelope. The envelope was cream, expensive, like the voice a rich aunt uses to tell you she's cutting you off. He offered it to me. Wolfe made the smallest of gestures. Yes, the butler may touch the silver, and I opened it. The paper inside was single sheet, typed with a kind of cool care you might use to invite your own conscience to supper. Replace the collar, it said. You know why. By midnight Friday, or I will. Friday, I said, being the day after tomorrow, and replace being a polite word for steal or return. Which is it? Caro shook his head. The collar, the embroidery. Some of it isn't embroidery. It's hand-applied stones. Garnets, they say. The rumor is, 60 years ago, a chorus girl replaced 3 with glass and sold the originals. Everyone says that's the curse. Like the costume wants its blood back. We rented it from the Marwood collection. Old trunks, estate sales. They find everything. Marwood catalog says collar intact. It isn't intact. I checked. 3 stones are not garnets. He cupped his hands as if holding the idea. I could swap them. I know sources. I could replace the collar, meaning make it look right, but the note, you know why. That's what's wrong. I don't know why. Or maybe I do and I don't want to admit it. If your conscience is to deliver your confession, Wolfe said mildly, it should arrive by hand, not by courier. Who has keys to the prop cage besides you? Me and my assistant, Lila Deep. She's 23 and meticulous. She's the one who writes labels no one reads. The stage manager, Dominic Fisk, keeps a spare taped under the desk. He winced as he said it. We pretend we don't know. Who else would want the collar altered? Restored, I mean, by Friday? I asked. Caro hesitated. Producers, investors. There's pressure to sell the streaming rights, and you don't sell a curse. Jordan Vale, our producer, smiles like a chandelier and hates bad press. Also, the leading lady, Katrina Shea, she's superstitious like it's cardio. She tried to get me to sprinkle salt. And there's the designer, Sarah Marwood. She's Marwood, the collection. She supplied the cloak. She checks it before every show like a mother hen with only one chick. And what do you expect of me? Wolfe's eyelids lowered, the danger signal on the meter. To sit in my house while you perform your obligations more conscientiously. People have arranged their own virtues without trifling with me. Caro leaned forward. The chair creaked a note. I expect you to tell me what the note means. I expect you to tell me who put the cloak on the chair. I expect you to keep this quiet. He looked down. I expect you to make me not be afraid that if I do the wrong thing, somebody gets hurt. The room did the thing it does when a client stops talking and starts existing. Wolfe does not stand. He does not soften. He considers you the way a botanist considers a species. Your petals, your stamen, whether you're worth cultivating. He also smells money with a subtlety that would shame a truffle hound, but won't chase it if it's muddy. Fear, when it's clean, has its own bouquet. "Mr. Caro," Wolfe said, "I accept engagements on 2 grounds, appetite and obligation. Appetite is a habit I cultivate within reason. Obligation I avoid unless coerced. I am not coerced. Your affair has an odor of contrivance. It is also—" He relaxed a fraction, which is like a glacier deciding to show you 1 more inch. Odd. Oddities are not necessarily delectable, but they are stimulating. He raised a finger. "However, it is 1 minute past 11. I attend to my plants from 9 until 11. I will not abridge that rule retroactively or prospectively to accommodate Velvet. You will leave your bag here. Goodwin will go to your theater this afternoon. If he finds that you have misstated the premise even trivially, I will instruct him to return at once. If not, I will advise you before 6 whether I will exert myself further. You will pay Goodwin's day rate for the reconnaissance and an additional $100 for the privilege of my notice." Caro nodded so fast I thought the cowlick would file a harassment claim. Yes, sir. Thank you." Wolfe's palm flicked. "The note," he said to me. "Leave it." Caro blinked. "But you will have a copy," Wolfe said. "Names and addresses." He looked at me. "He will give them to you." "I'm good at receiving," I told Caro. "Producers, stage managers, assistants, the designer and the leading lady, and the cloak's schedule. Who touches it, when, and how?" Caro stood as if his spine had been rented and the return policy was strict. Thank you." He glanced at the garment bag, then at Wolfe. You'll keep it zipped?" "I will keep it unmolested," Wolfe said. "Fritz will make it a pint of camphor and an apology. Mr. Caro, do not meddle with your collar. Do nothing conspicuous. Our value diminishes as your agitation spreads." He fled out past the coat tree, and I followed him to the front door. On the stoop he stopped and looked at me, eyes pleading not to be a cliché. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "people joke about theater curses, and then they get clever and build publicity around them, and then someone falls off a staircase. I don't know if the cloak is haunted. I know I'm haunted. You're young," I said. "It wears off. Or you start to haunt back." I gave him my card. "Any sudden developments, call. If anyone asks why you came here, say you delivered a rug for cleaning and leave the sincerity to actors." Back in the office, Wolfe had already shifted his attention to the beer as to a conversational partner who didn't waste time on adjectives. He eyed the garment bag, and then me. "You saw it?" he asked. I saw anxiety having a hobby. I sat. It could be a prank to goose ticket sales. It could be a private quarrel with public wardrobe, or somebody wants to replace those stones for a reason not strictly aesthetic, like glass out, garnet in, profit made, or the reverse. Wolfe's lip curled. "Profit made? There you are, trafficking in the obvious like a street vendor with a basket of pears. Consider instead the phrase, 'you know why.' It is not accusatory, it is familiar. It implies a conversation, explicit or tacit, between the writer and Mr. Caro. He denies such knowledge. Men often deny knowledge when the knowledge is ignoble, not merely inconvenient. Meaning Caro knows why, but the reason makes him look like a heel," I said. "If he's stealing back stones he once stole forward, he wouldn't lead with it." "Pa." Wolfe shut his eyes. He wasn't asleep. He was encouraging thought to behave. There is also the motion of the object within a locked enclosure. That is theatrics, literal and figurative. Someone staged a transformation. Someone wished a talisman to move without appearing to be moved. Why? To suggest agency outside the mundane, so that a mundane directive, replace the collar, could seem oracular. That is manipulation. The author of the note is not merely secretive. He is vain. "Producers are vain," I said. Designers are vain. Stage managers are vain, but in a different key. Assistants are vain when no one's looking. Actors, well. He opened his eyes, yellow-brown and bored with me. "You will go," he said. "You will attend to the Halcyon's backstage geography as to a battlefield. You will not be seduced by young persons who use their eyes as punctuation. You will not be trivial. If you find moths, kill them. Your priorities are my commandments." I pointed at the garment bag. "Do I dare unzip and make sure we aren't hosting a flock of cursed bats?" "No." He rang for Fritz. "We will permit the thing to sulk. Observation before incision. Fritz will isolate it. He will also provide lunch, which is more likely to fortify us than augury." "Yes, sir," Fritz said from the doorway, already brandishing a roll of muslin like a priest with incense. "I will make it a tent." Wolfe looked at the note on his desk as a judge might regard a writ that had attached itself to a docket in hopes of being admired. He flicked it to one side with a fingertip. "Save it," he said. "The typeface, monoface, modern, may be a refuge for anonymous cowards or the deliberate choice of a man who thinks his flourish betrays him. Goodwin, after lunch, you will take our schedule car and present yourself at the Halcyon. Bring a hat. The theater will demand respect in exchange for its dust." "If you're asking me to show reverence, I'll need a paramedic," I told him. "But I'll bring a hat." He closed his eyes again, a man saving energy for an assault to be conducted entirely by nouns. I left him to it, and Fritz and I cocooned the garment bag in muslin with such solemnity that if it had a soul, it felt vindicated. Fritz waved a tin of camphor around it like he was exorcising a municipal building. I took a whiff and mentally apologized to my sinuses. At 1:30, I was dressed for theatrical diplomacy. Dark suit that didn't mind dust, shoes that could climb stairs, and the tie Wolfe says makes me look less like a bayleaf. I put the note's envelope and a fresh notebook in my pocket, rang down to Panzer's number and didn't dial, then did dial anyway and hung up. I wasn't calling Saul yet, but I enjoyed knowing I could. On my way out, I stopped in the office, where Wolfe had a book open and a scowl on that belonged to the author. "Any last instructions, sir?" I inquired. "Yes." He didn't look up. "If the Halcyon has a resident cat, do not let it into your lap. You are susceptible to misplaced affection." "I only sit for creatures that purr. Present company accepted," I said. "What if the cloak is actually haunted? Then it will find someone more credulous. Bring me facts." He turned a page like it had interrupted him. I went out into a day that had made an arrangement with Summer not to leave too suddenly. On the stoop, I thought again about the envelope sentence. You know why. It's the kind of line that makes your mind offer you a platter of memories you didn't order. Dane Caro's face had done that. He knew something he wasn't prepared to say aloud, and someone hoped to squeeze it out by applying a superstition like a clamp. If you're keeping score, that counted as a reason to take the case. Not the velvet, not the dust, not the garnets. I don't have a jewel fetish unless they're on women who are smiling at me. But squeezing fear into silence is a craft that needs its contract cancelled. I flagged a cab, gave the driver the Halcyon's address, and as we swerved into traffic, imagined what I would find. A backstage that looked like belly fat on a grand old lady, ropes, sandbags, immortality applied with cold cream, and a cloak that had decided to fall in love with attention. I practiced a smile for producers and a nod for designers and stored a look for assistants that said, "You can trust me because I'm not trying to," which is the only kind of man worth trusting. By the time we hit Midtown, I had a plan that would make Wolfe proud because it was both nosy and lazy. Look, listen, be charming, and let the guilty act haunted by their own verbs. And if the cloak tried to curse me, I would inform it that Nero Wolfe was at home, waiting in a brown suit with beer. And as far as curses go, that one had priority. The Halcyon looked honest from the sidewalk, meaning it lied only about the right things. The marquee had gilt that knew how not to tarnish, and the poster cases offered nostalgia with fresh glue. Inside, a lobby conjured at least 3 decades at once, depending where you looked. I flashed my grin and a card at a woman in a black blazer with a headset. And I said, "Archie Goodwin, here to look at your superstition problem. If there's a door that doesn't open to that, it's not worth entering." She got me a stage manager with the speed of a fire drill. Dominic Fisk had the pallor of a man who loved a cue line more than a meal, and a haircut that said he liked things in order until chaos paid better. He took me through a corridor lined with framed photos of productions that thought they had changed the world and at least had changed somebody's rent. "You're with him?" he asked, meaning Wolfe. "We appreciate discretion." "You'll get it if you deserve it," I said. "Show me your prop cage, your tape, and your sins." He led me backstage, where the air was a cocktail of dust, paint, and ambition. Ropes hung like polite anacondas. The cage was a welded mesh annex with a padlock a prison would envy. Inside, shelves stacked with labeled boxes, hats on foam heads like jurors who had already decided, and a dedicated corner with a metal rod where costumes that weren't costumes were hung like evidence. A chair stood opposite the rod, just where a ghost might sit to admire its handiwork. "That chair last night?" I asked. "Wasn't there," he said. "We keep it by the makeup counter. Caro says he left the cloak on the rod, zipped in its bag, and locked up. This morning the bag was on that chair. He swears the lock was intact. Keys." He took me to the stage manager's desk, a barricade of clipboards and coffee rings. He pretended to be offended when I knelt and pointed. "Don't make me reach," I said, and he did it, lifting the lip of the desk and peeling tape to reveal the emergency spare. It was the kind of sloppy secret that expects to be respected because everyone's too busy to betray it. "Only me, Dane, and Lila have keys," he said. "Syrah doesn't. The producer, Jordan, doesn't. Actors don't go in there unless they're asked." "And who asked last night?" "Nobody," he said, which had all the confidence of a weather forecast. He got me Lila Deep, who materialized with a pencil behind her ear and a notebook that had its own index tabs. She was small, late to 20, and had the serious eyes of a person who knows where every spool of thread is and judges you for thinking they move by magic. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "you can look, but please don't touch without telling me. Some of these pieces break if you breathe memories on them." "I'm more of a present tense," I told her. "Tell me about the cloak. Who handles it?" "Me," she said, "and Dane, and Sarah when she wants to check for stress on the seams. Katrina, the leading lady, doesn't wear it. The cloak is for the villain in Act 3, but she touches everything like it might bless her. She's trying to be respectful. She's also trying to own the stage by osmosis." "Who wore it last night?" "Lyle Benton," she said. "He understudied the villain. The role scheduled for Emilio Vargas, but he had a throat thing. Lyle is careful. He doesn't sweat on history." "Does history sweat on him?" I asked. She didn't smile. "He was fine. No one fainted. The rig didn't fall." Then the ghost grew bored and rearranged furniture. I pointed at the chair. "You put it there?" "No. I found it there at 9. The cage wasn't open, but the cloak was out. The bag unzipped halfway like the person couldn't help looking, and then forced themselves to do only half a sin." She swallowed. "Dane said put it back, lock the cage, and he'd get help." "Who typed the note?" I asked, and produced a photocopy. Caro had given me one in the hallway before he ran back to his day. She studied it like a blueprint. "Not me. Not our office. We have a laser printer backstage, but the default margins are different. That's narrower. And the ink doesn't smudge the same." She looked up. "I notice things." "I like people who notice things," I said, and meant it. "Now get me your designer and your producer in that order." Sarah Marwood arrived with a lean rhythm that made me think of needles, not in a hospital but in a studio. She wore a tape measure like a scarf and had hands that spoke in parentheses. Her hair was the kind that falls into your eyes when you bend to work and stays out of your way when you're right. She gave the cage a look like she had built it herself and would dismantle it if it displeased her. The collar is 19th century work, grafted onto a 20th century form, she said when I didn't ask. The stones are set in closed-back basils. If someone replaced 3 with paste, they did it with skill or stupidity. Skill because you don't see it unless you know where to look. Stupidity because it fouls the balance. The weight pulls wrong. "And you rented this from your own collection," I said. "Marwood." "I placed it," she said. "The collection is my aunt's legacy. I manage. We don't rent if the piece will be abused. The cloak is sturdy. The collar, less so. I check it every night before places. Last night I arrived late. I checked at intermission. Fine. After the show, I checked again. Fine. Dane locked the cage. This morning the bag was on that chair and something in the fold was different. Define different. She moved to the chair like she was going to interrogate it and put her palm on the back, near a joint where varnish had been nicked. "Dust is a language," she said. "There was a swipe here and a smear there, and the kind of pinch mark you get when you hold velvet not to crease it but to carry it without leaving prints." She looked at me. "Someone handled this who knows how to handle valuable cloth." "Which is not your stage hands." "They're careful," she said, "but this felt like family." "Marwood family?" I asked. "Don't be banal," she replied, and I liked her for it because she wasn't pretending. Jordan Vale came in with a grin that could be exported and taxed. He was all shoulders and charm, the suit a shade too glossy and the shoes a shade too patient. He gave me a handshake that hoped to write the terms and then left it up to me to sign. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "love your tie. We're handling the wardrobe whisper. Our PR says a little mystique never hurt, but no scandals. There's nothing dangerous here but art." "There's art," I said. "I'll take your word for it. Here's mine. No one moves a cloak inside a locked cage to add mystique and then leaves a note that could tank your matinee. Someone's communicating with Caro, who's got a grudge." He did the spread of palms that says, "I am so open you can see daylight." Grudges are the theater's currency until opening night. After that, money takes over. Dominic thinks Lyle wants attention. Lila thinks Katrina wants sanctity. Sarah thinks the past wants revenge. I think Dane wants sleep. I need none of this. We go up 8 shows a week. We hit our marks. "Spoken like a checkbook," I said. "Show me the collar." Lila fetched the bag with the ceremony due a relic. She unzipped halfway, hands steady, and folded back enough to reveal the satin and the dark flood of velvet. The collar gleamed modestly, the stones deep as a bad idea you enjoy. I didn't touch. I leaned in, and Lila breathed like a librarian. "If I asked to take this out, you'd say no," I said. "So I won't ask, but I'll look." I looked and saw something small that didn't belong. At the inner edge, where stitching met satin, a pale filament no thicker than a hair. Not thread, more like fishing line. I noted it and said nothing. Instead, I sniffed. There was the standard wardrobe cocktail. Sizing, a whisper of old smoke leached from history, and something else. Not perfume, not camphor. A faint medicinal bite. The kind of cleaner that belongs to someone who worries about germs more than stains. "Who used the cloak this morning?" I asked. "No one," Dominic said from the doorway, spooked by my silence. "We don't rehearse in full costume when there's a matinee." "Who came in early?" "Katrina," Lila said. "She likes quiet. Sarah, me, Dane, Jordan, and Emilio to check on his throat." "That's half you above the title," I said. "Fine. I want call sheets, key logs, any delivery receipts in the last week that went backstage, and the list of who has access to your printer and your donor's patience." Jordan smiled, but his eyes were narrowing to see if he needed a lawyer. "Anything else?" "A quiet corner and a plug," I said. "I need to call my employer." I found a spot near the fly rail where the noise of activity was background and dialed. Wolfe answered on the second ring, which for him is like pouncing. "Well," he said. "Your ghost sits in chairs and knows fabric," I told him. "The spare key lives under the desk like a mouse." The note wasn't printed on their machine. The designer distrusts paste. The producer trusts nothing. The assistant notices margins. There's a trace of fishing line at the collar edge that shouldn't be there, and a disinfectant scent near the fold that doesn't come from the usual wardrobe stash. "Fishing line," he repeated, tasting it. "A means to lift or guide without bruising. And the scent suggests a cautionary sole or a recent concealment. Continue. Speak to the actor who wore it. Avoid the leading lady. She will try to make you admire her fear. And Goodwin." "Yes?" "Before you leave, ask the stage manager to open the cage under your gaze and seal it again. Then see if you can make the chair move without unlocking the door." "And if I can." "Then someone else did," he said, and hung up, having deposited a task and a compliment without labeling either. Dominic didn't love the idea of demonstrating how easily his security could be mocked, but Wolfe had told me to see if the chair could move without the padlock's cooperation, and my obedience was ironclad, at least while he was within earshot. So I had Dominic open the cage while I watched. He fumbled with his key, unlatched the padlock, swung the gate wide. Inside, the chair sat just as Caro had described from the morning, a plain oak with varnish worn at the arms, pulled close to the rod like an eager spectator. He locked it again under my supervision, the key turning with a click you could have heard in a whisper. "Now humor me," I said. "Suppose you're a trickster with a flair for props. You don't have a key. How do you get a chair through mesh without making it squeal?" Dominic's jaw worked, half insult, half curiosity. "You don't, unless you cut the mesh. And that's intact." I crouched by the gate. The mesh squares were wide enough for a forearm, but not for the bulk of a chair. Then I noticed that the bottom hinge of the cage door had play in it, a sliver of looseness no one cared about until now. With 2 strong arms and an appetite for leverage, you could wedge the hinge pin half out, angle the gate just enough, and slip a chair through. Not elegant, but show business thrives on angles. I tapped the hinge with my knuckle. "This dance step ever get rehearsed?" Dominic scowled. "No one's that desperate to move furniture." Until they were. I stood, brushing dust. "Fix your hinge or you'll have more haunted furniture stories than matinee tickets." The next item on Wolfe's list was the actor. Lyle Benton was easy enough to find. He was in the green room, sipping something herbal that smelled like regret. He was young, tall, and held himself like a man convinced the mirror owed him an apology. His suit was better than his shoes, meaning he had borrowed one or the other. "You wore the cloak last night," I said by way of introduction. "Tell me you didn't faint, scream, or summon spirits." He smirked. "It's a coat, Mr. Goodwin. Heavy, yes. Uncanny, no. The collar pulls at the throat, but only because it was made for a slimmer man. I did not faint. I did not scream. I did not summon spirits, though I had some gin after curtain. Did anyone handle it besides you, Dane, or Lila?" Sarah adjusted the clasp before Act 3. Katrina touched the hem in a passing, as if blessing me. Dominic helped me hang it up after curtain, because the bag zipper sticks near the top. Then Dane locked the cage. I watched him. "Anyone try to scare you about it?" He hesitated. "Emilio. He said I should be careful, that I was tempting fate. He's dramatic about illness, even when it's just phlegm. He hates being replaced, even for one night." "Actors hating understudies is as old as applause," I said. "What's your alibi this morning when the chair decided to be sociable?" "I was home, alone, in bed." "Convincing," I told him, and left him to his tea. By 3 o'clock I had collected enough contradictions to knit a scarf. Emilio resented the understudy. Katrina worshipped curses. Sarah distrusted the past. Jordan despised anything he couldn't invoice. Dominic believed in locks, but not hinges. And Lila noticed margins. Only Dane seemed genuinely afraid. And that meant either he was innocent or he was playing a role too well for community theater. I phoned Wolfe from the lobby payphone, the marble echo making my voice sound like I was confessing to posterity. He listened without interruption, though I imagined him leaning back, eyes half-lidded, weighing adjectives. "You have confirmed," he said when I finished, "that the apparition is not supernatural, but mechanical. The cage could be entered, the chair could be moved. The note was deliberate theater, staged to command belief. What you have not confirmed is motive." "I'm working on it," I said. "Candidates abound." Abundance is the enemy of clarity. Winnow, who benefits from restoring the collar with genuine stones? The Marwood collection, for starters. Their reputation spikes. Sarah gets prestige. "Or absolution," Wolfe murmured. "If she suspects her aunt or predecessors swapped stones, rectifying it quietly restores dignity. But she did not need a note for that. She had access. Then Jordan. He wants publicity, not scandal. A haunted cloak with a curse broken in time for Friday's press release. He'd bottle that. He is reckless enough. But the phrasing of the note was intimate. You know why. That suggests a personal lever, not a commercial one. Caro, then. Maybe he swapped them himself once years ago. Someone knows and is forcing him to correct it. Possibly. And there is the disinfectant. Did you inquire? Not yet. Smelled it near the collar. Could be cleaner, could be medical. Medical. Who among them has cause for medical sense? Emilio, I said slowly. Throat, spray, prescription lozenges. He reeked of menthol when I shook his hand. Wolfe grunted, which from him was enthusiasm. Attend to him. Do not confront directly. Observe. And Goodwin. Be wary of the lady. A woman who courts superstition may also wield it. She will use her credulity as a weapon. I'll bring garlic if needed, they said, but he had already hung up. Back upstairs, I found Katrina Shea in her dressing room, where mirrors bloomed with light bulbs and the air smelled of powder and champagne ambition. She welcomed me with the grace of a duchess auditioning for sainthood. Mr. Goodwin, she said, eyes wide, you've come to ask about the cloak. I knew you would. It speaks. It speaks, I asked. She nodded earnestly. Not in words, in presence. Last night, when Lyle wore it, the air grew heavy. I touched it to share courage. You understand. I understand theater, I said. Did you happen to be here early this morning? Yes. I meditate on stage when it's empty. It clears me. I didn't go near the cage. Her voice softened. A conspirator's whisper. But something is wrong with Dane. He fears the cloak more than he should. You should watch him. I left with a smile that promised nothing. Out in the corridor, Emilio was rehearsing lines under his breath, his voice rasping like sandpaper. He caught my eye and bristled. I'll be back on tomorrow, he said defensively. No understudy needed. Glad to hear it. You didn't happen to tidy the cloak this morning, did you? Look it over. Of course not, he snapped. I wouldn't touch it. That's Caro's mess. But as he strode away, I caught the faintest trace of that same sharp disinfectant trailing behind him. Not perfume, not cleaning solvent. Medical. The pieces were starting to lean toward each other, not yet fitting, but humming in anticipation. I had the sense someone was pushing, using superstition as a stage curtain to hide a much simpler, sharper trick. And if I knew Wolfe, he'd already decided who wrote the note. All I had to do was bring him enough to let him prove it without leaving his chair. I stayed a while longer in the Halcyon's maze because when Wolfe tells me to observe, he doesn't mean glance around and hum a tune. He means sniff every corner until the wallpaper starts confessing. So I lingered near the cage, the stage, and the dressing rooms until I had a stomach full of contradictions and a notebook full of half-clues. By late afternoon, I figured I'd earned the right to leave. The real digestion would happen back on 35th Street, with Wolfe chewing through the human frailties like Fritz through veal. On my way out, I crossed paths with Dane Caro again. He was pacing near the stage door, hair wild as if he'd tried to rearrange it by hand and lost the argument. When he saw me, his relief looked dangerous, like he might grab my lapels and pour his fear into me by osmosis. "Well?" he asked. "Did you see? What do you think?" "I think you're a man too young to look that guilty without reason," I said. "Relax, Caro. No one's going to be exercised in public. Not yet. But you'd better tell me something straight. Why does whoever wrote that note believe you know why?" His lips trembled around a word he decided not to say. He shook his head. "I don't, I swear. Listen, Mr. Goodwin. I've worked props since I was 18. I've handled pieces worth fortunes. I don't steal. I don't tamper. But my father, he was a collector. He died 5 years ago. He had dealings with the Marwoods. Maybe someone thinks I inherited something I shouldn't have." That was the kind of line you didn't swallow whole. I filed it away, gave him a pat that probably didn't comfort, and left him pacing. Outside, I flagged a cab and rode back to the brownstone with the cloak's scent still in my nose and the disinfectant tang clinging to memory like a paper cut. Inside, Wolfe was in his chair, broad as an indictment, sipping beer. He didn't look up when I entered, which was his way of saying he'd been waiting for me since before I left. "Well?" he asked finally. I laid out the whole day, the loose hinge, the chair maneuver, the understudy's complaints, Katrina's superstition, Emilio's menthol cloud, Sarah's needle-sharp observations, Jordan's chandelier grin. And at the end, Caro's mention of his late father and the Marwood connection. Wolfe grunted at the right places, which meant he was knitting a sweater of logic and I was supplying the wool. When I finished, he sat silent for a full minute. Then he asked, "You saw the collar?" "Yes. 3 stones are impostors. You can tell if you lean close." "And the filament?" "Fishing line. Clear, thin, near the seam." He nodded once as if that thread tied more than fabric. "Pui. The cage is irrelevant. The note is relevant. Its phrasing, you know why, is not for the public. It is for Caro. Either he knows, or he refuses to know. Both are culpable." "Meaning?" "Meaning tomorrow, you will press Mr. Caros on his father's dealings. Quietly. Meanwhile, Mr. Panzer will investigate the Marwood family and their collection. What sales, what acquisitions, what disputes in the last decade. I require a pattern." I picked up the phone and called Saul. If there's a man who can turn library dust into gold dust, it's him. I set him on the Marwoods like a hound on a trail. Wolfe, satisfied, rang for beer and closed his eyes, which meant conversation was over unless I wanted to get lectured for interrupting digestion. The next morning, while Wolfe tended orchids, I headed back to the Halcyon. This time I found Caro in the prop room, hunched over a ledger like it might confess. He jumped when I closed the door behind me. "Relax," I said. "It's just me. And since you didn't faint yesterday, you can handle a simple question. What did your father have to do with the Marwoods?" He bit his lip until it went white. Then he whispered, He bought from them. Sold to them, sometimes without receipts. He liked pieces with stories. The cloak, he had it once for a while, when I was a kid. I remember him showing me the collar. He said, "This is incomplete. Someday, someone will want it whole again." He laughed like it was a joke, but he never said more. "Did he ever mention switching stones?" Caro swallowed. "Never, but if he did, maybe someone thinks I know where they went. I don't, I swear." There it was, a motive strong enough to rattle a cage. a missing inheritance disguised as stones, resurfacing in a cloak. Whoever wrote that note wasn't just scaring a stagehand. They were demanding restitution. The curse wasn't about velvet, it was about ownership. I left him sweating and phoned Wolfe from the lobby. "You were right," I said. The old man had the cloak, knew it was incomplete. Someone's trying to drag the sun into the bargain. Wolfe's voice rumbled like a cat that had just swallowed a dictionary. As I expected. "Continue. There is more beneath. Watch Emilio tonight. He reeks of disinfectant because he handled the collar with fear of germs, or fear of leaving evidence. If he meddles again, seize the occasion." "Seize how? You won't let me carry handcuffs." "Your wit will suffice," he said, and hung up. That evening I bought a ticket and sat in the orchestra. The play was a slog of waltzes and menace, but I wasn't there for art. When Act 3 came, Emilio strode on stage in the cloak, throat raw but serviceable. The collar glittered under the lights and I leaned forward, waiting. His hand brushed the embroidery too often, as if checking. When the act ended, he left the stage fast, cloak still on. I slipped out the side aisle and followed. In the wings, he tugged the cloak off before Lila could help. He clutched the collar, fingers trembling, and for an instant I saw it. A glint of metal wire, a tiny loop hidden in the seam. Fishing line. Emilio slipped something into his pocket before handing the cloak over. He didn't see me watching. Now I knew. The line wasn't a ghost's tool, it was Emilio's. And whatever he had taken, it wasn't paste. I didn't make my move right there in the wings because Nero Wolfe doesn't pay me to lunge. He pays me to watch, file, and spring when the ground is solid. So I let Emilio hand off the cloak to Lila, saw her zip it into its muslin cocoon with more reverence than a priest giving last rites, and waited until the stage traffic swallowed him. When he ducked into the dressing hall, I followed at a distance. His door shut, and I caught the faint scrape of a drawer sliding shut before the murmur of him gargling with that medicinal throat spray. I leaned against the corridor wall, weighing the odds of barging in versus letting Wolfe pull the string later. My gut said Emilio had pocketed something he wasn't ready to show anyone. Something small, hard, and with more sparkle than an understudy's dream. If I pushed too soon, he'd either swallow it or spin a tale slick enough to waste another day. Wolfe wouldn't approve of wasted days. So I let it ride. I gave the green room a last circuit, enough to smile at Katrina as she fluttered her nerves like prayer flags, and nod at Dominic, who was counting clipboards as if they might multiply if he blinked. Then I phoned Wolfe from a corner where the payphone smelled like dust and old gum. He handled the cloak tonight, I told him, fingers twitching like he was playing cat's cradle. I saw a wire loop in the collar seam, same as yesterday, and then he pocketed something before Lila zipped it up. My money says it wasn't paste. You refrained from accosting him. His voice had that dry edge that told me he was half testing, half approving. I refrained. I thought you'd want the performance to run its course before we turned it into a vaudeville. Correct. A premature confrontation would scatter dust before I have gathered enough for clarity. You will not approach him tonight. Instead, inquire into his past, who supports him, who pays his bills, what debts he carries. A man who tampers with stones has a reason, greed, fear, or leverage. We must know which. Saul's already on the Marwoods, I reminded him. You want him doubled up on Emilio? No. Mr. Panzer must finish his thread. Delegate Emilio to Mr. Fred Durkin. He will pry into finances with his usual blunt charm. Report to me by morning. I hung up and did just that. Fred met me at a diner 2 blocks from the Halcyon, where the coffee was black enough to float nails. He scratched his head with a fork and grunted when I gave him the outline. Actor, huh? Figures. Half of 'em are broke, the other half act broke. I'll sniff him out. You want receipts or just the stink? Both, I said. But start with the stink. He's hiding something in his pocket, and I'd rather know whether it's worth more than his paycheck before I go fishing. Fred ambled off to start his patrol. I went home, and Wolfe was waiting, surrounded by the kind of silence that makes you feel like an interloper in your own house. He listened to my update and allowed himself one fat sigh. "Goodwin, you perceive, but you do not yet comprehend. The cloak is a vessel. It carries not a curse, but a confession. Someone seeks restitution. Emilio's fingers betray not superstition, but calculation. Until we know whose debt he pays, we have only smoke." The next morning, the orchids had Wolfe's full attention, so I stayed in the office fielding calls. At 10 sharp, Saul rang with his report. "The Marwoods," he said, "are old money running on fumes. The collection is their last jewel. 15 years ago, a scandal. Stones gone missing from a batch of costumes sold at auction. Quiet settlement, no names, but the father of our friend Caro was in the mix. His signature on a receipt then vanished. Looks like the cloak's collar was one of the casualties." I thanked him, hung up, and had barely set the receiver down before Fred called from a payphone near Times Square. Our Emilio's up to his ears in IOUs, bookie in Queens, dentist in Midtown, and one high-interest lender with hands like hams. He's been trying to sell jewelry on the sly. Nothing flashy, just little stones. Garnets, maybe. That sound familiar? It sounded like a bell tolling right into Wolfe's logic. I relayed both reports when he descended from the plant rooms. He closed his eyes, fingers steepled, and said, "So, the Marwoods lost stones. The elder Caro may have profited. The son is haunted by implication. Meanwhile, Mr. Vargas attempts to liquidate what may be the missing garnets. He risks discovery by staging theatrics, moving a cloak, leaving a note, so that suspicion falls not on him, but on a legacy. Phooey, the man is a fool, but a desperate one." I asked, "Then the note was Emilio's?" "Almost certainly. The disinfectant was his signature. He handled the collar, restored the line, perhaps even replaced the imposters with the genuine stones. But why Friday?" I spread my hands. "Maybe his debts call in then. Or maybe the producer's deadline, streaming deal, publicity, whatever, gives him cover. He wants the collar whole before someone else inspects it." "Possibly. You will watch him tonight and bring Mr. Caro to me tomorrow. We must see whether innocence breeds truth or only further pretense." That night I watched Emilio from the shadows of backstage. He wore the cloak again, voice rough, hands steady. No theatrics with the collar this time, no fishing line. But afterward, when the audience's applause rolled like distant thunder, I saw him slip into the corridor with a hand pressed to his pocket as if guarding treasure. The act was nearly finished, and if Wolfe was right, the reveal would not be on stage, but in the office on 35th Street, where velvet could sulk all it wanted and guilt had nowhere to hide. By the next morning, I had 2 things ready for Wolfe. A breakfast strong enough to stand up to his glare, and Dane Caro, nervous enough to sweat through his jacket before we'd even reached the office door. Wolfe had decreed the summons the night before, and Caro had agreed with the docility of a man who knew the weight of velvet wasn't his only burden. I ushered him in, sat him in the red leather chair that had already started to dislike him, and took my own seat on the side, a notebook in hand. Wolfe remained in his throne, plump fingers steepled, eyes hooded like a cat who intended to pounce at a leisure. "Mr. Caro," Wolfe began, "your father's association with the Marwoods is known to me. Stones vanished. Accounts were clouded. He profited, or at least participated. That is history, but history bleeds. You are its heir." Caro flinched as if Wolfe had tossed the words like knives. "I swear to you I don't know where the stones went. My father never told me. If I did, Mr. Wolfe, I'd give them back. Gladly. His hands twisted together, white-knuckled. "Spare me your oaths," Wolfe said curtly. "Your ignorance may be genuine, but someone believes otherwise. Hence the note, hence the theater. You are convenient. That convenience may ruin you. I leaned forward. We know the cloak was moved deliberately. We know the note wasn't typed on your office machine, and we know someone's been pocketing stones recently. Does the name Emilio Vargas give you heartburn? Caro blinked, confused. Emilio, the leading man? No, he's vain, yes, but he has nothing to do with this. He doesn't even like the cloak. He likes its collar, I said. Enough to fiddle with it on stage. Enough to tuck something into his pocket when he thought no one saw. He's been trying to sell garnets on the sly. Garnets that might once have belonged on your cloak. The blood drained from Caro's face. He slumped, stunned. Then, it wasn't me. It wasn't a curse. He did it. Wolfe's eyelids lowered a fraction. Do not be eager, Mr. Caro. Yes, Mr. Vargas has tampered. Yes, he has debts. But whether he began this affair or merely exploited it remains to be determined. What matters is that your name was chosen to carry blame. We must see to it that it is removed from the ledger. Caro tried to thank him, but Wolfe cut him short with a flick of his hand. Goodwin will see you out. You will not speak of this to anyone. You will return to your duties and feign ignorance. If you are pressed, you will look confused, which should require little effort. That will be all. I escorted Caro to the door, where he muttered gratitude like a man reciting prayers. Once he was gone, I returned to find Wolfe already pouring himself another beer, his brow furrowed. He is innocent, Wolfe said flatly. His fear is too pure. But innocence is not insulation. He will be scapegoated unless we displace suspicion where it belongs. Tonight we must act. That sounded like an invitation to trouble, and I'm not the kind of man who refuses a dance. Fred called at noon to confirm Wolfe's hunch. Emilio had pawned 2 stones in the last week. Garnets, yes, but of an unusually deep color, the kind that would match the collar if you held them to the light. 1 pawn ticket was still warm. That was all Wolfe needed. By 4, instructions were clear. I was to collect Emilio after rehearsal, under pretense of delivering him to a friendly admirer who wanted an autograph. Instead, I steered him into a cab and up to the brownstone, where Fritz gave him a look sharp enough to trim his ego before Wolfe even appeared. He tried charm first. Mr. Wolfe, it's an honor. I've admired your reputation. The theater could use more men of, precision. Phooey, Wolfe said. Spare me your panegyrics. Sit. Emilio sat, though he perched like a cat ready to bolt. Wolfe regarded him for a long silence before speaking. You have debts. They gnaw at you. You have jewels, small, red, enticing, which you attempt to convert into cash. Those jewels belong in the collar of the cloak you wear on stage. This is not speculation, it is knowledge. You may save us time by confessing how you obtained them. Emilio's grin faltered. His hand went instinctively to his pocket, then dropped. That's absurd. I'm an actor, not a thief. You are both, Wolfe replied, and a poor one at each. You sought to restore the stones secretly, so that when the cloak was examined by Friday, by patrons, investors, or collectors, it would appear whole. You would then claim innocence, even pride, while your debts receded. To disguise your meddling, you created a spectacle. The cloak moved, a note left, a curse implied. The fool Caro would carry suspicion, and you would pocket absolution along with money. But you are clumsy. The disinfectant stench betrayed your touch. The fishing line betrayed your method, and Mr. Goodwin's eyes betrayed your pocket. I leaned forward. You want me to pull it out now, Emilio? Or do you want to put it on Wolfe's desk yourself? His hand shook as it reached into his jacket. He placed a small pouch on the blotter, the kind jewelers use when they're ashamed of their merchandise. Inside were 2 garnets, dark and heavy as gilt. There are more, Wolfe said calmly. Where? Emilio sagged. Pawn shops. I was going to buy them back when I had enough. I just needed time. Time, Wolfe said with disdain, is what you have squandered. Tomorrow evening you will return every stone you have touched. Goodwin will collect them. If you fail, I will deliver this matter to the police, the producers, and the press. Choose. Emilio muttered something about ruin, about desperation, but Wolfe's eyes were already closed, signaling the conversation's end. I escorted the actor out, pouch in hand, and left him to stumble into the dusk with his career hanging by a thread thinner than that fishing line. Back inside, Wolfe opened his eyes and took a long pull of beer. Sir, the haunted costume is no phantom. It is merely the stage for a common vice. Tomorrow we gather the players. Their histrionics will end in my office, where they belong. And just like that, the curtain was set for the confrontation. The following day, the brown stone felt like it was holding its breath. Fritz polished the silver with unnecessary precision, as if preparing for royalty, while Wolfe sat behind his desk with the placidity of a man about to unleash war without leaving his chair. I had made the rounds that morning, delivering Wolfe's summons personally, so there'd be no excuses about missed messages or artistic temperaments. By 7:30 that evening, every chair in the office was occupied, and every occupant knew they'd rather be anywhere else. Sarah Marwood perched with controlled poise, arms folded as if she were already defending the family name. Jordan Vale sprawled too comfortably, the sheen of his suit at odds with the nervous tick in his jaw. Katrina Shea had dressed as though for a matinee audience, wide eyes and fluttering hands, rehearsing innocence. Dominic Fisk sat hunched, resentful of being dragged into a room without clipboards. Dane Caro looked like a man about to drown and praying someone would at least note the date. And Emilio Vargas, well, Emilio tried for bravado, but his eyes flicked too often toward me, as if my pockets might contain his ruin. Wolfe let them settle, then rang for beer. Fritz delivered the tray with solemn efficiency, ignoring the guests as though they were stains on the carpet. Wolfe sipped, set the glass down, and began. You are here because a cloak has been disturbed, he said. A garment that carries with it both legend and fraud. You have permitted yourselves to treat its disarray as superstition or publicity or accident. I will not. The truth is plain, though most of you have labored to obscure it. He let that hang, surveying the group. No one spoke, though Jordan's grin flickered. Wolfe's eyes shifted to Caro. Mr. Caro's father once possessed the cloak. He knew its collar was incomplete, and he profited, or attempted to profit, from its imperfection. That stain has haunted his son, who has borne suspicion without evidence. The note addressed to him, you know why, was calculated cruelty. He did not know why, but I do. Caro exhaled shakily, his relief tangled with confusion. Wolfe turned his gaze to Sarah. Your family's collection supplied this piece. You checked it nightly, with skill and devotion. You suspected the collar's deceit, but concealed your doubts to protect the Marwood name. That concealment gave opportunity to another. Sarah's lips thinned, but she didn't object. Wolfe shifted to Katrina. You, madam, are enamored of superstition, but you are merely an echo chamber, useful to amplify whispers of curses, not to create them. You are dismissed from suspicion. Katrina fluttered, half insulted, half relieved, but she stayed silent. Mr. Vale, Wolfe continued, your interest was publicity, but even you would not risk replacing paste with garnets while creditors circled. You are reckless, not desperate. Jordan's grin held, but barely. Dominic shifted in his chair, but Wolfe's glance was already moving on. Which leaves Mr. Vargas. Wolfe's tone deepened. Emilio stiffened, mouth opening in protest, but Wolfe spoke over him. You, sir, had debts. You had access. You wore the cloak, and under guise of illness you contrived. Opportunities. You extracted stones with fishing line, masked your interference with disinfectant, and pawned what you could not hide. You staged theatrics, the chair, the note, to misdirect suspicion toward Caro and his father's history. a petty stratagem. Your vanity thought the ruse clever, but your execution was tawdry. Mr. Goodwin observed you pocketing the stones. Mr. Durkin traced your debts and your pawnbroker. The matter is closed." The silence cracked like glass. Emilio surged forward in his seat, fists clenched. "Lies! This is character assassination. I'm the leading man, not—" "You are a fool," Wolfe interrupted, voice cold. "And if you continue, you will be a leading man in court, where your character will be dissected with less restraint. You may salvage your career only by returning every stone and confessing to your producer. Do so, and I will allow this to remain a private correction. Refuse, and tomorrow morning Mr. Goodwin will deliver your pouch and your pawn tickets to the police." All eyes swung to Jordan Vale, who had paled despite his polish. He sputtered, "If this is true, Emilio, my God, you've endangered the whole production." Emilio sagged, bravado gone. I only meant to fix it, to make it whole again before anyone noticed. I thought if the collar was intact, the curse would end. Investors would pay. I'd be free." Sarah's eyes closed, a flash of pained comprehension. Dominic muttered something under his breath that sounded like idiot. Katrina clutched her pearls as if scandal had physical weight. Wolfe lifted his glass, dismissive. "You sought absolution through deception. It is a common failing. You will rectify it, or you will perish by it. That is all." The meeting dissolved under its own gravity. Jordan dragged Emilio out, hissing threats about contracts and lawsuits. Katrina wailed softly about betrayal and curses confirmed. Dominic bolted back to his clipboards as if they might restore order. Sarah paused only long enough to nod once at Wolfe, a gesture that might have been thanks or acknowledgement of shared clarity. And Dane Caro lingered a moment longer, his shoulders lighter before slipping out into the night. When the door closed behind the last of them, Wolfe exhaled and leaned back, the weight of his bulk redistributing into the chair like a verdict rendered. "Phooey," he muttered. "Theatrics." "Sure," I said, "but you stole the show." Emilio folded faster than a bad script, and Caro might even sleep tonight. I'd call that a decent curtain. "Decent?" Wolfe echoed as if the word insulted him. "Fraud unmasked, avarice chastened, reputation preserved. That is the minimum. Tomorrow Fritz will roast squab. We will eat in peace." I grinned, setting my notebook aside. Haunted costumes, pawn shops, and curses. All in a week's work. Remind me to bill extra for hazard pay. Wolfe closed his eyes, already dismissing me. "Bill what you like, Archie. Humanity's folly remains inexhaustible. That is compensation enough." And with that, the brown stone settled back into silence. Velvet curse exorcised not by incense or salt, but by logic, pressure, and Wolfe's unmovable disdain. The theater might still whisper about hauntings, but here the matter was closed, filed away like an old program no longer worth keeping, except as proof that even ghosts must answer to reason. By the next morning, the brownstone had shaken off its brief career as a theater annex. Fritz hummed in the kitchen, the orchids had their peace restored upstairs, and Wolfe was in his chair with the New York Times, looking like a man who had arranged the universe properly and intended to keep it that way. I was in the office too, nursing coffee and wondering whether Emilio Vargas had managed to dig himself out of the mess Wolfe had so neatly dropped on his lap. The telephone answered that question for me. It rang sharp, and when I picked it up, Jordan Vale's voice came through, brittle with outrage. "Goodwin, you tell your boss this isn't finished. Emilio's vanished. He didn't show up for rehearsal. He didn't return the stones. He's gone." I covered the receiver and said to Wolfe, "Our leading man just joined the understudy pool permanently. He's disappeared." Wolfe's brow furrowed, but he didn't lift his eyes from the paper. "Gone?" I repeated Jordan's words, adding a little vinegar for effect. Wolfe sighed heavily and folded the Times as though it had offended him personally. "Predictable. Mr. Vargas has neither the spine to confess nor the wit to conceal indefinitely." Flight was inevitable. I relayed this to Jordan, who sputtered about lawsuits and ruined productions before slamming the line dead. I replaced the receiver and looked at Wolfe. So the case isn't quite wrapped. You going to let Vargas skip town with garnets rattling in his pockets? No. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half closed. If he absconds, the scandal festers. Caro remains vulnerable. The Marwoods, too. My work is unfinished until restitution is tangible. We must retrieve the stones. I waited, because when Wolfe says we in that tone, he means you. Sure enough, he opened his eyes and focused them on me. Goodwin, you will locate Mr. Vargas. He will be desperate, but not resourceful. Start with his creditors. Desperation clings to the places it owes. By noon, I had Saul on the trail again, nosing around pawnshops and bookies, while Fred checked bus depots and train stations. I took the Midtown beat myself, visiting a Queens bookie who confirmed Vargas had been in the hole for $4,000 and counting. He paid me half yesterday, the man said, smirking. All in cash. Stones turn to bills, if you ask me. He promised the rest soon. If he doesn't show, I'll find him. I'd prefer you didn't, I said, slipping him a look sharp enough to discourage extracurricular hunting. He's spoken for. By late afternoon, Fred called in from Penn Station. Saw him, Archie. Vargas bought a ticket south. Cash, but he didn't get on the train. He was spooked. Left through the 8th Avenue exit. That meant he was still in town, circling like a moth, too scared to leave the flame. I checked in with Saul, who had better news. One pawn shop clerk remembered Emilio pawning a small garnet the day before. He came back this morning, Saul reported. Wanted to redeem it. Said he'd have the cash by evening. He's not running, he's circling. I brought the news to Wolfe over dinner, where Fritz's squab was crisp enough to make me forgive the day. Wolfe chewed slowly, eyes narrowed in thought. So, he intends to restore the stones after all. He fears exposure more than debt. That fear can be shaped. Meaning? Meaning, Archie, you will fetch him. Tonight, offer him sanctuary here, under my conditions. If he balks, remind him of the police. If he agrees, we will secure the stones before dawn and end this charade. So off I went again, to the shabby hotel Saul had traced him to on West 49th. Vargas answered his door with the look of a man who hadn't slept since curtain call. He was still in yesterday's clothes, rumpled and sour. When he saw me, he sagged against the doorframe. I can't, he muttered. It's too late. They'll destroy me. Not if Wolfe gets there first, I said. Come with me. Bring the stones. He'll settle it. Or I can walk you to the nearest precinct and let the tabloids do the settling. Your choice. He hesitated, then fished a small box from his suitcase. Inside were 3 garnets, dull in the weak lamplight, but heavy with history. His hands shook as he passed them over. They're not all here, he whispered. I still need to redeem 2 more. Then you'd better come, I told him. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe didn't rise when we entered. He looked at Emilio the way a judge looks at a guilty plea and motioned for him to sit. I set the box on the desk. Wolfe opened it, examined the stones with a careful eye, and nodded once. Half, he said. The rest? Emilio swallowed. Pawned. I'll get them tomorrow, I swear. You will get them tonight, Wolfe corrected, voice flat. Goodwin will accompany you. You will redeem them and return here before midnight. Otherwise, I notify the police at dawn. There was no mistaking the finality in that tone. Emilio wilted. Within the hour, we were in a cab, stopping at 2 pawn shops where his trembling hands counted out bills. By 11:30, the pouch was heavier, and by midnight it sat on Wolfe's desk, full again. Wolfe closed it, satisfied, and leaned back. So, the curse is lifted. Not by charms, not by prayers, but by compulsion. Mr. Vargas, you will resign from the production quietly. Mr. Vale will announce a health replacement. The cloak will be returned to the Marwoods intact, and you will vanish from their affairs." Emilio nodded, beaten. Wolfe rang for beer. I leaned against the wall, notebook forgotten, watching the curtain fall on another performance. The haunted costume had found its voice, and it had spoken not of ghosts, but of debts, greed, and fear. And, as always, Wolfe had silenced it without rising from his chair. The pouch of garnets sat on Wolfe's desk like a fat exclamation point at the end of the whole affair. Emilio Vargas, hollow-eyed and beaten down to his last shred of bravado, had slumped in the red leather chair for nearly half an hour, while Wolfe lectured him with the patience of a man who dissects folly the way botanists dissect roots. By midnight, Wolfe had finished his sermon. Emilio had mumbled agreement to every term, and Fritz had escorted him out with a courtesy that didn't extend beyond the threshold. The door closed, and the brownstone reclaimed its silence. I leaned against the wall, watching Wolfe turn the pouch slowly in his hand. He wasn't admiring the stones, not really. He was weighing them as if their heft carried all the stupidity and desperation that had been hung on this cloak. Finally, he set the pouch down and reached for his beer. "So that's that," I said, easing into my chair. "The curse is dead. The stones are home. Caro can stop chewing his nails, and Emilio can go back to whatever actors do when they're not stealing from costumes." Curtain down. Wolfe's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "You're too eager, Archie. The play has ended, but the epilogue remains. Until restitution is formally acknowledged by the Marwoods and the Halcyon's management, the matter is incomplete. Meaning you want a final act in this office with the producer and Sarah to hand over the collar like it's a coronation." "Exactly," Wolfe said. He closed his eyes, settling back. "Tomorrow evening. You will arrange it. Caro should attend as witness, and Mr. Vale must be instructed in discretion, lest he yield to the temptation of publicity. This must be sealed quietly." I made the calls the next day, each one greeted with varying shades of disbelief, relief, or dread. Jordan Vale protested that the show's reputation couldn't take another scandal. Sarah Marwood insisted she needed to examine each stone herself. Dane Caro simply said he'd be there, gratitude leaking through his voice like air through a punctured tire. By 8 o'clock that night, the chairs in Wolfe's office were filled again, though the tension had shifted. It wasn't suspicion now, but something closer to weary anticipation, as though each of them wanted the matter finished and buried. Fritz brought in the pouch on a tray, as solemn as if he were presenting crown jewels. Wolfe, in his chair, gestured for Sarah to take it. She did, her hands steady, and one by one she tipped the garnets into her palm. They gleamed under the lamplight, red as old secrets, and she held them up to the collar of the cloak that Lila had delivered in its muslin shroud. Her eyes narrowed, sharp as needles, and then she nodded. "They're genuine," she said softly. "All of them. The weight is balanced again." Jordan exhaled like a balloon losing air. "Thank God. We can move forward. Quietly. No one outside this room needs to know." "That," Wolfe said, "depends on your restraint. If you parade this as a miracle or indulge in tales of curses broken, you invite inquiry. Inquiry will lead to ruin. You will replace your leading man with an excuse of illness and continue your performances without mention of the cloak's history. Do you understand?" Jordan swallowed, then nodded. "Perfectly." Sarah slipped the stones back into the collar with a deftness that spoke of long practice. Her face softened, though it carried something else too. Sorrow, maybe, for the legacy her family had nearly lost. "The collection thanks you, Mr. Wolfe," she said. "Phooey," Wolfe muttered. "Thank not me, but necessity. I acted only to restore balance. Mr. Caro may now sleep without apparitions." Caro looked as though he might kneel in gratitude, but Wolfe's eyes snapped him back into his chair. he murmured thanks instead, humble and awkward. With that, the meeting dissolved. Sarah left with the cloak secured, Jordan rushing after her with promises of discretion, and Caro trailing behind like a man released from purgatory. The office grew quiet again, the garnets gone, the chairs empty. I looked at Wolfe. So the haunted costume's back in its cage, the stones are where they belong, and Emilio's career is a smoking ruin. Anything else, boss? Wolfe opened his eyes, heavy-lidded, and reached for his beer. Yes, humanity is incapable of learning. In a decade, another fool will contrive another spectacle, and another garment will be desecrated. Appetite, Archie, is infinite, whether for food, wealth, or folly. I grinned. Maybe so. But in the meantime, dinner's finite, and I smell Fritz working on something worth living for. Wolfe inclined his head, conceding the point. He took another sip of beer, then let out a sigh of satisfaction that sounded like punctuation to the whole affair. And just like that, the brownstone returned to its old rhythm, orchids upstairs, dinner below, and a case closed not with handcuffs or headlines, but with logic, pressure, and the immovable bulk of Nero Wolfe reminding the world that even its curses, like its men, are answerable to reason. For 2 days afterward, the brownstone returned to its natural rhythm, orchids in the morning, Fritz in the kitchen, Wolfe enthroned in the office, and me running interference with the telephone. The case of the haunted costume, I figured, was finished. The cloak was back in Marwood hands with its collar intact. Emilio Vargas had vanished from the Halcyon Billings with illness as his excuse. And Caro walked around with the dazed relief of a man who had escaped a hanging by clerical error. That should have been the end of it. But the universe doesn't file things neatly just because Wolfe does. On the third afternoon, while Wolfe was dozing in his chair after lunch, the phone rang. I picked up and heard Sarah Marwood's voice, tight and controlled. "Mr. Goodwin, I need to see Mr. Wolfe, immediately. It's urgent." Her tone had the kind of tension you don't ignore, so I roused Wolfe. He muttered darkly about interruptions, but he didn't forbid it. And an hour later, Sarah was in the office with the muslin-wrapped cloak in her arms. She set it down on the table as though she were presenting evidence in court. "It's been tampered with again," she said. Her face was pale, her hands steady. "This morning, during a routine check, I found the seam at the collar opened. Slit neatly. Someone removed one of the stones. Again." That got Wolfe's eyes open. He leaned forward, studying her. "Impossible. We restored them all. Who has had access since?" "Only myself," she said, "and Dane Caro. But he swears he hasn't touched it, and I believe him. The cloak has been locked in the collection's secure room. There are cameras, guards. Yet one stone is gone. Replaced with paste. Again. I felt the chill of déjà vu, but sharper. If Vargas had been the culprit, and we'd shut him down, then someone else had decided the cloak was still worth bleeding. I glanced at Wolfe. He was frowning, which meant the gears were grinding faster than usual. "You brought it here," he said finally. "That was wise. Goodwin, examine it." I pulled on a pair of gloves Sarah had brought and unwrapped the muslin. The cloak lay heavy and dark, its collar gleaming dully. Sure enough, one of the bezels looked wrong, stone-glassy, cut shallower than the others. Whoever had swapped it knew enough to fool a casual glance, but not a collector's eye. "It's fresh work," I said. "Whoever did this wasn't Vargas. He's out of the picture." "Obviously," Wolfe murmured. "Then who?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "If not Vargas, then someone with deeper reason. Someone who wants to make the Marwoods look careless, or to profit at our expense." "I thought the matter finished, Mr. Wolfe. Clearly it is not." Wolfe's fingers tapped the arm of his chair. "You are correct. This is no longer about debt or desperation. This is about legacy. Someone intends to implicate your collection, Or you." Sarah didn't flinch. "Then find them, please." After she left the cloak with us, Wolfe ordered beer and silence. He sat there, eyes closed, lips pursed, while I paced. Finally he spoke. "Archie, gather them again. Not Vargas. He is finished, but the others. Vale, Fisk, Caro, Miss Shea. We will test them." The author of this second desecration has revealed a different appetite. Envy, not need. I asked the obvious. Why them? Vale wouldn't risk his money. Dominic cares about clipboards, not jewels. Katrina likes superstition, not sabotage. And Caro, he's barely holding himself together. Exactly, Wolfe said. One of them gains by discrediting the others. We will expose which. So the next evening, the Brownstone hosted its second cast party. This one less theatrical, but no less tense. The cloak sat on the round table like a guest of honor. Wolfe addressed the group with his usual gravity. "Since our last meeting," he said, "the cloak has been violated again. One stone removed. This time, Mr. Vargas is not to blame. He is gone, disgraced. Therefore the culprit is among you." That landed like a hammer. Vale cursed under his breath. Dominic sputtered denials. Katrina gasped theatrically, and Caro looked ready to faint. Wolfe ignored them all. "Observe," he said, gesturing for me to lift the collar into the light. I did, and the false stone winked back at them like an accusation. This substitution is recent, precise, and deliberate. Whoever performed it is skilled with fabric, knows value, and has motive to diminish the Marwood reputation. Sarah, who had returned for the confrontation, stood still as stone. Her eyes flicked across the group, sharp and unyielding. Wolfe let the silence build until it pressed like weight on the room. Then he said softly, "One of you has erred in assuming Mr. Vargas's disgrace would mask your own ambition. One of you believes the Marwoods are vulnerable. You are wrong. Before the evening ends, I will name you." I watched their faces. Vale's grin had curdled into calculation. Dominic's hands fidgeted. Katrina's eyes darted between us, soaking up the drama like a sponge. And Caro sat utterly still, eyes wide as though praying Wolfe would find someone, anyone else. It wasn't over. The cloak wasn't finished, and the ghost we'd buried had come back, not to haunt the stage this time, but to expose whoever had decided that a family's legacy was theirs to loot. Wolfe had promised a name before the evening ended, and I knew him well enough to know he already had it. The rest of us were just waiting for him to spring the trap. The office was so still you could have heard Fritz sharpening knives in the kitchen. Wolfe let that silence steep until the suspects were practically writhing in their chairs. Then, with the calm of a man dictating a recipe, he began. "Mr. Vargas was crude," he said, "but he was honest in his desperation. His theft was obvious, his pawning clumsy. When he was removed, I assumed the matter closed. But another desecration occurred, one more subtle, more deliberate. This required a different mind. Not a debtor, but a rival." Jordan Vale shifted in his chair, straightened his cuffs, and forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Wolfe's gaze lingered on him only briefly before moving on. "Mr. Fisk is too pedestrian," Wolfe went on. "His loyalty is to schedules, not stones. He would never dare. Miss Shea is enamored of superstition, yes, but she is incapable of such precision with needle or seam. Mr. Caro's fear is genuine. He is heir to suspicion, but not to malice." Which leaves one. All eyes swung to Sarah Marwood. She did not blink. "Yes," Wolfe said. "It was you, Miss Marwood. You discovered Vargas's meddling long before I intervened. You let him serve as decoy, certain his ruin would cover your own intent. You are skilled enough with fabric to slit a seam and reset a stone. And you alone had consistent access to the cloak once it left the halcyon. You replaced one garnet with paste, not for money but for leverage. By creating the appearance of recurring theft, You could declare the collection endangered, insist on greater control, perhaps even remove the cloak from production entirely. A subtle sabotage, cloaked as protection. Sarah's face remained composed, but her fingers tightened on the arm of her chair. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Wolfe. You're suggesting I would harm the very reputation I strive to protect. Wolfe's eyes half closed. Reputation is malleable. A scandal, if managed, can elevate as well as destroy. You calculated that the Marwood name would emerge stronger if you were seen as savior of a legacy under siege. Vargas's disgrace was convenient, but insufficient. So you staged another violation. Your ambition betrayed you. The silence that followed was thick enough to spread on toast. Katrina gasped like she'd stumbled into Act 3 of a melodrama. Vale muttered something sharp and unprintable. Caro looked like he'd been handed his life back twice in 1 week. Finally, Sarah spoke. Her voice was cool, measured. "And if you're wrong, then," Wolfe said, "you will have no objection to submitting the cloak to independent appraisal. The seam bears evidence. The stitch is not Vargas's. It is yours." He lifted a finger toward me. "Archie will see to it." I nodded, ready to collect the garment. Sarah's calm cracked then. Her eyes flashed, and she rose to her feet. "Very well. You've made your point. Vargas endangered everything. I sought to protect it. If I erred, it was in judgment, not in loyalty." "Phooey," Wolfe said. "Loyalty does not excuse deceit. You sought glory, not protection. You may salvage your family's dignity by restoring the stone at once and saying nothing further of this affair, or you may deny and endure the consequences. Choose." For a moment, the air held its breath. Then Sarah exhaled sharply, like a general conceding a lost battle. "I'll restore it," she said, "and it will never be touched again." "Good," Wolfe said, closing his eyes. "Then this performance is ended." They filed out, subdued, leaving only Wolfe, myself, and the heavy quiet of a brownstone that had once again swallowed scandal whole. I poured 2 whiskies, because beer wasn't enough for the coda of this drama, and handed him one. He sniffed it, frowned, and drank anyway. "Well," I said, "that's one for the books. A haunted cloak that wasn't haunted, a thief who wasn't the only thief, and a collector's pride stitched tighter than the seams. Not bad for a week's work." "Not work," Wolfe murmured. "Correction, human appetite distorts. I merely set it straight." "Sure," I said. "And all without leaving your chair." He closed his eyes, signaling the end of conversation, and I leaned back in mine, letting the silence settle like dust after a storm. Outside, the city kept on buzzing, but inside the brownstone dinner waited. Orchids thrived, and justice, Wolfe's brand of it anyway, had been served. And if ghosts lingered at the halcyon, they'd have to haunt someone else.